I lost my train of thought. Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Jamie and today we are going to be going over all of the books I read in October. Before we get into it, I do want to say if you are waiting for the third installment of my Explaining the Animorphs series, I promise it's coming. I'm actually sitting down going through the books. I'm about halfway through my notes and then I have to film it, but be assured it's on its way. I just wanted to get my October wrap up out of the way before I started filming that. Last month, I made this whole big hubbub about how I can't pay attention to books and I needed to really challenge myself by reading physical books only. I wasn't going to listen to any audiobooks. I really needed to just read words on a page to help with my attention span and make sure that I'm actually taking in what I'm reading and having critical thoughts on it and yada yada. And that went out the window in October. I don't know why. I guess some of my Libby holds came in. Most of these books are ebooks. I only have one physical copy, which I actually DNF'd. So let's get into it. We're going to start with So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. I read this for the October book club. It is about vampires. I read the ebook and it was very short. I think I read it in like a day or two. But then I also saw the physical copy when I went to a bookstore recently, and it's thin. It's a thin book. Our main character is Sloane, a 30-something-year-old woman who is just very stuck in a rut. She has a mortgage and a job and a husband who's unfaithful, and she's just very unhappy, but it would be too inconvenient to leave. She doesn't feel comfortable taking that step into vulnerability that would come with leaving her life behind. Her best friend from childhood is a woman named Naomi. Naomi is a party girl. She's the manager, social media manager, PR person, whatever, for her rock star boyfriend. So she's been traveling Europe, having orgies, partying, going to clubs, all of that. So these two best friends for Sloane's 36th birthday party go to a cabin in the woods. It's like a resort cabin. And there they meet a group of people who change their lives. It's obviously vampires. Our people are obviously vampires, and following the plot of a normal vampire book, our characters get turned into vampires. And from there it goes batshit insane. Because they're fledgling vampires, they are consumed by their hunger. It's not hunger, it's thirst, because it's blood. So instead of like eating, they're thirsty, which I thought was great. I mean, the book is titled So Thirsty, but the entire time they are just lamenting how thirsty they are. And Sloane is very adamant that she is not going to follow any instructions that have been given to her by senior vampires, and she's just going to run away from her problems. And the entire time, her friend Naomi, who has very low impulse control, just keeps quenching her thirst. And that's the plot of the book. I enjoyed it. It was fast. It was fun. I think there is a very interesting theme about aging, because Sloane hates the fact that she's aged. There's also this very toxic friendship between Naomi and Sloane, and I thought that was very interesting. After the third or fourth incident, you kind of just sit there and go, Sloane, just make a good choice, please. Stop running away. Other than that, it was fine. It was a good read. It was pretty meh for me. The ending was a little rushed, and I had a great time discussing it at book club. So next, I read The Deep by Rivers Solomon, narrated by none other than Daveed Diggs from Hamilton fame. Oh my gosh, love Hamilton, love Daveed Diggs. This is a sci-fi novella in which mermaids, like legitimate mermaids with fins, are the descendants of enslaved women who were thrown overboard during the slave trade for being pregnant. That is a real thing that actually happened. Our main character, Yetu, is the historian, because of the tragic past of their ancestors, the mermaids don't remember. They like lose their memories of the painful, tragic, traumatic beginnings of their people. And all of those memories are given to the historian and passed down from historian to historian. Yetu is the newest one. She's still pretty young. And we learn that these memories are painful. They are physically painful. Yetu is in pain for remembering them. Every so often, Yetu is able to give these memories to the community for them to remember the traumatic history and feel that pain, but then ritualistically give it back to Yetu. During one of the rememberings, Yetu decides that it is too painful. She does not deserve this suffering. It cannot be given to only one person. So after she has unloaded all of these memories onto her community, she flees to the surface. From there, she meets people, she learns different things. So I listened to this on audiobook, and because there is some timeline shifting, going into the past, going into different perspectives, that's always going to be a bit harder for me to follow on audio. I would have preferred to read this as a physical or ebook so I could kind of keep track of where we are in the timeline, whose perspective we're in. I think this is a great metaphor for legitimate generational trauma, this idea that traumatic things that happen to an ancestor still live inside of you. It's like ingrained into your DNA. But then also this idea that you must learn your past, even if it's horrific, even if it's painful to know that these things happened. You have to keep that memory with you. I think it's explored well through this metaphor that also involves mermaids and keeps it interesting, you know? Next, I read The Bog Wife. This has been on my TBR for a while. It was a Libby hold that I had for several months. The Bog Wife focuses on one family called the Hadleses, who claim to have been on a bog, like owned this bogland property for generations. And they are only able to survive on this bog because of ritualistic sacrifices and other rituals and stuff that they do. It's very cultish. We focus on the 5 siblings of the newest, most recent generation as they go through the ritual of their father's death in order to sacrifice their father to get a bog wife. Each firstborn son is promised a bog wife to have children with, continue the Hadlesey line, and through that there's like an agreement, an arrangement with that and the magic of the bog to keep the bog alive, I guess. It's been a while since I've read this. Each character has their own perspective chapters, and each of them have their own storyline that kind of intertwines with this. Our oldest child is Edda. She is a daughter. She's the oldest daughter, so no matter what she would ever achieve in life, she was never going to be the patriarch. She is the personification of parentification. When it comes to oldest daughters, you might have heard this, like, oldest daughters are often parentified. They are made to be a second mother, specifically since their mother, another bog wife, disappeared like 10 years ago, I think, in the storyline. So Edda, who was a young adult at this time, really had to take over raising her siblings and becoming the parent. She also nursed her father as he died. So she has this whole story of being the most responsible one, being the caretaker, but never being the patriarch, never being the person in charge. Then we have Charlie, the second born but firstborn son. Charlie has been groomed since he was a child to have a bog wife. His entire responsibility as the patriarch is to take care of the family and have children. But shortly before the story begins, Charlie has a tree fall on him, which disables him, like shatters his hip and pelvis, but also makes him impotent. We talk about his testicles a lot. We don't need to go over that. But anyway, because he's impotent, he is unable to fulfill the patriarch duties. Then we have Wenna, who is the middle child. She, 10 years ago, ran away from home and had an entirely different life outside of this cultish family, and is the only one who knows what the outside world is like. We have Nora, who's the second to last born. She is kind of the peacemaker. She's the one that wants to make sure nobody fights. She often sacrifices her own well-being in order to keep people from getting angry. She hates when people are angry at her. But within this of trying to keep the peace, she also lacks being discussed or being, the center of attention, because she's often trying to like smooth things over, and she desires that. She desires being the one chosen. And lastly, we have Percy, who's the last born but second son. He was told by his father to usurp Charlie as the firstborn by killing him. Percy's unable to do that, but because of that, he now feels that he is supposed to be the patriarch, the one who was supposed to get a bog wife. But because Charlie is the firstborn son and he is not, he is unable to do that, to do what he thinks he deserves to be. It was a great story. I loved all of the characterizations. I loved how each character had their own battle. And it just was really, really well done. Oh, I think I forgot to say, the entire premise is that when they try to do the ritual to get a bog wife for Charlie, one doesn't show up. There is no bog wife for Charlie. And so they are kind of at a loss for what to do since the ritual didn't work. And they are told that for centuries, this has always worked. This is how it has always been. And because there's no bog wife, there's no like exchange, that also means that the bog will probably die. I forgot to say that. I'm so sorry. But with that information, we learned some secrets. We learned some truths that are revealed. We learned some things that are a little hard to grapple with for the family who is set in their ways. It was a wonderful book, and I really, really enjoyed it. I specifically really resonated with Wenna. I'm not sure if the author also just really, really liked Wenna as a character and so fully fleshed her out more than the other siblings, or if I just really related to Wenna, and because of that, I felt more connected to her and her story, which made her feel more fleshed out. But Wenna was definitely my favorite perspective chapters. She is a middle child who left her family and moved away. I am also a middle child who moved away from my family, so I really understand that idea of like coming back to a family that's a bit different than you remember. When it came to Percy and Nora, those were the two chapters I didn't like the most. Just felt a bit bored, did not relate to their characters at all. I mean, in the grand scheme of the story, they were really, really well written, but I was bored reading those chapters. There were also some things that are revealed in certain chapters or in certain parts of the story, and then we get reveals later on that seem to contradict. So by the end of the book, I was a bit confused, like what the canon was, because we learned some things, but then some things are also true. And I know that's really vague, but they're big spoilers, and I don't feel like spoiling right now. But other than that, really, really great book. Loved the vibe. It's set in West Virginia, so it's very Appalachian. And I loved the family aspect of it, of these characters who kind of hated each other, but also loved each other. Really great. I highly recommend. A Harvest of Hearts by Andrea Eames. Eames? I don't know. So one of the comp titles for A Harvest of Hearts is Howl's Moving Castle. I think the book reveals its cards a bit too early by having Howl's Moving Castle be its comp title. This book definitely feels like the author enjoyed Howl's Moving Castle and wanted to take that same story and put their own spin on it. I don't want to say that it's exactly derivative. I mean, you could say that about so many books, but it is one of those things where if you describe it kind of loosely, it is the same story as Howl's Moving Castle. This story features a wizard or sorcerer who is known for taking hearts. They briefly meet with our main character. Our main character becomes cursed and leaves her village or normal life in order to find an end to this curse. In doing so, she comes upon the house or castle of the wizard or sorcerer. And then in order to learn more about the sorcerer, she becomes the housekeeper of the house because the sorcerer is actually horrifically messy and the house is a pigsty. And it's a magical house with changing doors and yada yada. If anyone else has read A Harvest of Hearts, you can definitely call me out and say, well, you're just explaining it super loosely, super, vaguely in order to make it fit the Howl's Moving Castle synopsis. And that's true. There are some differences. The sorceresses and sorcerer take hearts because the magic is derived from eating the hearts. Our main character is cursed not to look like an old woman, but because she believes that her heart has been taken by the sorcerer, she goes to his house to make him give her heart back or try and find it herself. There's this outer plot where we learn that there's kind of a society of people who've had their hearts taken and are trying to find a cure. We find out that the sorceresses and sorcerer are made from like orphaned children and turned into magical beings. And that's about where I stopped. There were a lot of reasons I stopped. I wasn't vibing with the writing style. I didn't really like the main character. I felt kind of annoyed to be in her head, and I wasn't a big fan of the plot. I also think that the book, again, in the plot, shows its hand a little too early. I'm sure there are some other big twists later on, but I had guessed it, and we were only like 30 or 40% of the way through. I didn't really care what other big major plot points could have happened later on in the book. I just decided that was it for me. Actually, I can see how far I was when I DNF'd. 42% of the way through the book when I decided, not for me. I was bored, didn't really like the main character. Something I want to complain about, though, is that I'm not super pedantic when it comes to anachronisms, especially in a fantasy. Don't really care. I'm not a historian. I don't really care if there's like potatoes in medieval Europe inspired fantasies. It's a fantasy made for a modern audience. They're not going to care if there are potatoes, even though potatoes were not introduced to Europe until much later. I know my parents would care, but I did post on Threads that this book a few times refers to fancy dishware as fine china. And that just kind of took me out. I don't know why that specifically took me out. And I posted that just like, oh, haha, this is funny. Like they called it fine china when it could have just been dishware or porcelain or whatever. And quite a few people were like, you're ruining your reading experience by being pedantic. And I just want to vent and say, I think there's a difference in anachronisms, like the difference between potatoes in a medieval inspired Europe, or like the outfits not being historically accurate, than calling dishware china. I think that's a different level of anachronism. There's a hierarchy of anachronisms. I don't know. By that logic, you can't use Burgundy either, because Burgundy is the name of a French city. I don't know. Maybe I've never really cared if somebody calls something Burgundy before, but the China one really just took me out. I was like, what? I DNF'd The Daughter of Dr. Moreau about 50% of the way through. And the main reason why, just to get it out of the way, is just that I was bored. I didn't really feel enticed by the story. The Daughter of Dr. Moreau is a retelling of The Island of Dr. Moreau, which is by H.G. Wells, huge foundational science fiction writer. I've had this much wine. It wasn't full, it was like there. And I can't speak now. The Island of Dr. Moreau is about a guy who washes up on an island and meets a mad scientist who splices animals together. There are a lot of different adaptations, interpretations, samplings of this book. You've probably seen one before, but it is taking animals, splicing them together, and making animal-human hybrids. This takes the story, the idea of Dr. Moreau, and sets it on the peninsula of Yucatan, Mexico during the late 1800s. Yeah, the mid to late 1800s, a time where Mexico was kind of having its own revolution and the indigenous people of Mexico were trying to fight for their own independence against Spain. We focus on the titular daughter of Dr. Moreau, who is Carlotta, and Montgomery, who is the basically manager of the estate and laboratory of Dr. Moreau. That's about it. There's a sort of, not really romantic, to me it wasn't romantic. To me it was actually kind of creepy. Montgomery is 35 and Carlotta is 20, and they have this like bickering kind of romantic back and forth where he is very obviously interested in her and she seems to be trying to understand why she may be interested in him while also being interested in another man who is age appropriate but also racist and horrible. It's kind of a love triangle, but the options to me were just kind of icky. I didn't like Montgomery at all, and I did not like Eduardo because he's introduced as an asshole and is only really an asshole throughout the rest of the book. I did kind of flip through, read excerpts just to see if there was anything interesting that would keep me engaged in the book, and no, I wasn't really interested in it. I didn't like either option for her love interest. I didn't really like Carlotta as a character. Again, she just felt very flat and annoying to be stuck in her head, and I was not a fan of Montgomery. I thought he was creepy. So next I listened to The Hounding by Xenobe Purvis. It's an X, so I think it's Xenobe. I listened to this on a road trip back from Indiana, and I think it's one of my favorite reads of the year. I truly did love this book. I thought it was a wonderful, slow-paced think piece. The premise of this book is that a group of 5 sisters are accused of becoming dogs. They're accused of turning into dogs at night and terrorizing the local village. The sisters already come from a family that's not very well liked in the village, and then on top of that, they themselves are very unfriendly, just kind of keep to themselves. What I love about this book is that it's about these 5 sisters and the idea that they might be turning into dogs without ever being in their perspective. Every perspective chapter is about a character that kind of surrounds the story and talks about them. I also love the ambiguity about them actually turning into dogs. Because we're not in their perspective chapter, even towards the end, you're not sure if they actually turn into dogs or not, if this is a magical, fantastical book, or if this is just superstition. And I think that's really the point of the book, is that it's only superstition. I loved every character. I thought every character had a wonderful reason for telling their story. I thought they had their own internal struggles that were very, very wonderfully explained. We have a character who is like very full of himself and has a hatred for these girls. We have a character who grew up in this village and hated how violent the men were and tries not to be super violent because he's a soft-spoken, sensitive boy that ostracizes him in the village. We have a character who's blind, like their grandfather is blind and can't really see what's going on with the girls, even though they live in his house. And we have a character whose whole thing is that he's just in love with the oldest daughter, and I loved him. They were just the most fun to listen to. It was such a good listen. When it comes to the fantastical versus superstition, I think the whole point of this book is when you think about like witch hunts and vampire burials. It is undeniably fun to spook yourself out and ponder this idea that there's a paranormal element to the world, that there is a part of the world that is magical and you can't quite reach it. And the things behind that paranormal veil are spooky and out to get you. And that is really fun to ponder. And it can be spooky. But what's really, really scary is the reality of the situations that in the witch hunts, in these vampire burial, vampire hysteria, none of them were witches. None of them were vampires. They were all real people, just regular people who, for one reason or another, caught the ire of a townsfolk, were blamed for diseases, were blamed for deaths that were not their fault. And people were killed. People had their bodies desecrated. People had their graves upturned. People were tortured, all because of superstition, and how superstition is so powerful that it could turn an entire town against innocent people. And I think that that's definitely the point of this book, and that's something to always ponder, is when you're talking about, you know, the tradition of vampire burials, when you're talking about witch hunts and burning witches at the stake and whatnot, you do have to remember those were real people. Those were women. Those were men who were normal and for whatever reason were blamed for things outside of their control. I really, really loved the messaging of this book, even though it's ambiguous on whether they are actually dog women or not. I think a book that has that kind of message is really, really important, especially in October around Halloween, when we're uplifting all these vampire narratives, these witch narratives, these werewolf narratives. We always have to remember that to a certain extent, superstition is a scary thing. And that is all the books I read in October. I hope you enjoyed my rambling. I hope you took something from that last little lecture. I'm going to finish my wine, and I guess I'll do laundry for the rest of the day. And that's it. Bye. Really got deep there, didn't I?